What legacy did you choose to end? They said it was my duty, that I was born to carry it on. I smiled, nodded, played the part, but behind the polished name and family pride was something darker, something no one wanted to talk about. And the day I refused to pass it down, everything changed. They called me a traitor. I called it the first honest thing I'd ever done. My family owns a chain of funeral homes. Not flashy, not scandalous, just quiet buildings with cream walls, polished pews. And that soft artificial scent people mistake for peace. We've been in the business for 3 generations. My grandfather opened the first location in 1954. By the time I was born, we had 4 branches across 2 counties. Our last name, Carrington, meant something where we lived. People spoke it with a mix of reverence and unease. Like they weren't sure if we were saints or something else entirely. I was the only son of the youngest Carrington brother. That made me the future. According to my grandfather, he used to say that in front of everyone, even when I was just a kid trying to sneak snacks at the wake buffet. The future of the legacy, he'd say, patting my head like a prized show dog. I didn't know what it meant then. I just knew that my family always had rules. Carringtons don't cry in public. Carringtons don't ask what's not theirs to know. Carringtons take care of Carringtons, no matter the cost. When I was 16, I started working part-time at the Eastview location. Just cleanup work, errands, basic prep. Nothing too grim, at least not at first. I remember the first body I ever saw. A man in his 80s, dressed in a navy suit, hands folded like he was praying. I stood in the prep room doorway too long, and my Uncle Robert nudged me in with a joke, "Don't worry. They can't hurt you. It's the living you gotta watch." I laughed. I didn't understand how right he was. By 19, I was shadowing embalming procedures. Filing certificates. Making quiet deliveries in the company van. That's when I started noticing things. Small things, like why some paperwork had different dates than the tags on the bodies. Why a few death certificates had lines blacked out or overwritten. Why we stored some files in locked drawers labeled C records when everyone else's went in plain folders. The first time I asked my father about it, he didn't answer. He just looked at me and said, "We don't talk about process. Only results." By 22, I was in college but commuting home on weekends to help with family matters. My dad said it was important I learn the legacy from the inside. What he meant was, don't just learn how the business works, learn how we keep it working. That's when I got introduced to the clients that didn't sign the same contracts as everyone else. There were families that came in after hours. People who used the back door. Men in suits who didn't grieve, they negotiated. Sometimes there wasn't even a body. Just ashes. Or a sealed bag. I'd be asked to move things without asking what they were. Drive boxes labeled estate transfers to offices that had no names on the door. And through it all, my dad would just say, "This is what Carringtons do. We carry the weight so others don't have to." But I started keeping my own records. Not because I planned to expose anything. Not yet, just because I needed to understand what I was a part of. I had notebooks hidden in my dorm. Dates, names, roots, discrepancies, notes about families that never showed up on public obituaries. Patterns in the files marked C records. That's when I realized something deeply wrong. There were bodies that never got listed. People with no next of kin, no photos, no public death notices. And we weren't just cremating them, we were signing off on paperwork that said they'd never existed. One night, I made the mistake of asking my grandfather directly. I said, "What does C record mean?" He stared at me for a long time, then poured himself a glass of bourbon and said, "Closure. For the kind of deaths that don't belong in the paper." Then he told me a story. About a judge in 1978 who died in a motel with someone who wasn't his wife. About how Carrington, but on silence. After that, I started looking deeper. I used my school's database access to pull old records. I checked missing persons lists, compared them to funeral home logs, and found dates that matched too closely. A 17-year-old girl who vanished in 1993, no closure, no trace. But our Eastview branch logged a Jane Doe cremation that same week, same size, approximate age. Another file showed a body delivered for cremation with no certificate on file. Just initials, no witnesses, no official cause of death. I brought it up to my uncle once, asked what the legal process was for anonymous cremations. He just gave me that tired smile and said, "Some people die in ways the law can't fix. We help them rest anyway." But I knew it wasn't about rest. It was about erasure. By the time I graduated, they offered me a full-time role, assistant director of operations. My own office, company car, cornerstone of the future of the family. I took the offer, not because I wanted it, but because I needed to see how deep it really went. Turns out, there were clients on retainer. Annual payments, cash only, for just-in-case services. I found one file labeled early contingency, pre-approved, discretion guaranteed. Inside was a notarized document that basically gave us permission to dispose of a body under specific conditions with no questions asked. That's not funeral work, that's something else. One night I confronted my dad. I told him I wasn't comfortable. He said, "Do you think this family's name came from burying grandmas and hosting prayer services? We built our name by making problems disappear." Then he said the line that still haunts me. "There's no honor in legacy. Just leverage." That's when I knew I couldn't be part of it. I started backing up files. Quietly, taking photos of documents, saving scanned contracts to encrypted drives. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't carry it forward. I started turning down responsibilities, skipping meetings, asking too many questions. That's when things shifted. My cousin stopped talking to me. My uncle started double-checking everything I touched. One day, my email account was wiped due to a system upgrade, but only mine. They said it was a glitch. I didn't believe them. Then came the dinner. A big family dinner. All the Carringtons. My grandfather at the head, giving his usual toast. Except this time, he turned to me, in front of everyone, and said, "Some of us forget what they owe." Silence followed. Forks frozen. My mother staring at her wine glass. And then I said it. "I'm not continuing this." My father's voice was quiet, but sharp. "You don't get to walk away. You are the name." "No," I said, "I'm not. I'm just the first one to say it out loud." That was the last meal I had with them. I moved across the state. Took a job in a logistics firm. Changed my number. Kept the encrypted files in a cold storage server under a pseudonym. I've thought about going public. I've come close. But the Carringtons are powerful. Connected. Smart. I've already seen how they can wipe a name from the earth without so much as a whisper. So I wait. And I write. And I remember. Because they called it legacy. I called it a ledger of secrets bound in silence. And I chose to end it. I didn't expect the silence to be so loud. For the first few weeks after I left, it was almost peaceful. No calls, no emails, no threats. Just quiet. I started to believe maybe they'd let it go. Maybe the Carringtons had written me off as just another rebel who'd burn out and come crawling back. Then came the letter. No return address. Just my name, handwritten, in the old formal script my grandfather used when signing checks. Inside was a single piece of stationery. Cream-colored, heavy, the kind used for announcements or weddings. Except this wasn't a celebration. 3 lines. Legacy doesn't end with you. There are others. Don't forget who taught you to keep things buried. I stared at it for an hour. No threats. No demands. Just a reminder. A warning. They weren't done with me. And more importantly, they weren't done with whatever legacy they believed I was foolish enough to abandon. I didn't sleep that night. Every car engine outside made my heart race. I checked the locks 3 times. Covered the camera on my laptop. It wasn't just fear. It was the realization that I wasn't just dealing with family anymore. I was dealing with an infrastructure. An institution, built not on laws but on loyalty. And I was the one who broke that chain. I didn't tell anyone about the letter. Not even the one person I thought I could trust. Her name's Morgan. We met in college. She was pre-law, top of her class, the kind of person who could gut you in a debate and still make you want to thank her for it. We reconnected after I moved. She didn't know everything, but she knew enough. That I'd left the family business. That I had issues with how things were done. I'd never told her the full truth, not because I didn't trust her, but because once you say it out loud, it becomes real. Not just memory, not just history, real. But after the letter, I told her. I showed her the files. The scans, the contract copies, the cash receipts, the cremation logs with initials instead of names. At first she was silent. Then she asked one question. "Do you know how deep this goes?" I didn't, but I was about to find out. Morgan offered to help. Carefully, quietly. She still had contacts from her internship at a state compliance office. She started digging, legally, discreetly, pulling records of permits, health inspections, fire department logs. What she found scared both of us. One of the Carrington branches had quietly settled a code violation 3 years ago after a fire in one of the storage wings. The report said faulty wiring. But the fire department log had a redacted note, presence of unauthorized materials discovered during response. No further detail, no follow-up, just a fine, paid in full. Next inspection passed with flying colors. Another facility had gone through 6 different managers in 4 years. All listed as resigned for personal reasons. No public complaints, no lawsuits, just one buried note in an internal memo from the Department of Health, pattern of early cremation requests without full certification. Morgan said that line alone was enough to raise red flags. Then she asked if I'd ever heard of Category 4 transport orders. I hadn't. Apparently, it's a rare internal classification used when moving remains between counties under extreme discretion, often due to biohazard, legal restriction, or jurisdictional complexity. It's supposed to be used by hospitals, coroners, or state agencies. But someone had authorized 7 such transfers through Carrington facilities in the past decade. Someone without a badge. We cross-checked the authorizing signature. It matched my grandfather's handwriting. Exactly. The problem? He'd supposedly retired from all operational duties in 2012. 3 of those transport orders were signed in 2015. Morgan said she couldn't prove anything without official access. But she gave me one piece of advice. Whatever you're holding onto, get it out of your hands. Make it someone else's problem. So I did. I copied everything onto 4 USBs. One I mailed anonymously to an investigative journalist. One to a former state employee who now worked in corporate oversight. One to a federal ethics office, unsigned. And the last, I kept. Not for safety, for leverage. 2 weeks passed. Then someone broke into my apartment. They didn't take anything. Nothing was damaged. But they left the folder, the one with the fake client contracts I'd marked for review, in the center of my kitchen table. Open. With a single line underlined in red ink, client's request to remain unnamed shall be honored in perpetuity. No fingerprints. No witnesses. Just a quiet message. We know what you're doing. We know what you're watching. And we can walk right through your door. I left the city the next morning. Morgan helped me set up a private mailbox in another county. Rented a furnished place under a friend's name. I disappeared the same way Carrington clients did, no fanfare, no trace. The irony wasn't lost on me. That was 5 months ago. Since then, the journalist I sent the drive to published a piece. Nothing explosive, yet, but enough to stir the pot. She called it a legacy of quiet burials, when funeral homes decide who gets remembered. It didn't name us, but if you knew the business, the references were unmistakable. She said she had more coming. This is just part 1. I haven't heard from Morgan in 2 weeks. She said she was going to meet someone, a source who claimed to have worked at one of the facilities in the 90s. She didn't say where, just said, if I don't text by Friday, assume something went wrong. Friday came and went. I'm trying not to panic. Trying to tell myself it's just logistics. But I know the signs. I've seen what happens to people who go poking into Carrington history without permission. They vanish. Quietly. Respectfully. As if they never mattered in the first place. But here's the thing. They taught me how to erase people. What they never taught me was how to stop one from coming back. I started driving again. No real plan. No destination. Just a string of cheap motels, gas station coffee, and rest stops where I kept my back to the wall and my keys between my fingers. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I turned off my phone. Bought a burner. I'd seen too many clients, too many families, disappear under the guise of traveling or changing jobs. I wasn't going to give anyone the chance to write my exit for me. But I couldn't sit still either. I kept replaying everything Morgan had uncovered. The fire, the unauthorized cremations, the Category 4 transfers, and then, the worst part, the pattern I'd almost missed until she pointed it out. The names, buried in the spreadsheets, the ledger books, the index cards with faded ink. There were names that showed up more than once. Not just deceased, not just family members, but the same names, listed on different documents, across different years, as responsible parties. As if someone had quietly reused identities. Or worse, fabricated them altogether. One of them, Gregory Miles, appeared on a cremation log from 2008, again on a transportation request from 2011, and once more as a witness signature on a 2016 intake sheet, in a county he'd supposedly never lived in. That's when the truth hit me harder than anything else had. We weren't just covering up deaths. We were creating fictions, filling in gaps for clients who needed not just bodies handled, but lives rewritten. Fake deaths, quiet erasures, reassignments, and if you think that sounds dramatic, ask yourself this. How many people do you know who disappeared and were never really looked for? I stopped in a small town halfway between nowhere and someplace I didn't recognize. Checked into a roadside motel where the clerk didn't ask questions. I stayed there for 6 nights, barely sleeping, scanning every page of Morgan's old files, the ones she'd forwarded before she disappeared. On the 3rd night, I found something new. An email thread buried in her inbox archive. It was from someone using a ProtonMail address. No name, just a string of numbers. But the subject line read, I worked there too. 1992-1996. The body of the email was short. Disjointed. Almost like the person was typing through panic. We weren't told names. Just times. Just rooms. Just what to sign. They paid us not to ask. I tried once. Got reassigned. Still hear the knock sometimes. If you're reading this, be careful. It doesn't end at Carrington. No attachment. No signature. Just that. I replied. Never heard back. I sent the whole chain to a secure archive and burned the drive I'd used. Then I did something I told myself I wouldn't. I reached out to someone from the family. My cousin Evelyn. She'd left years ago. Moved west. Opened a florist business. Cut off all ties. Rumor was she had a breakdown. But I remember her differently. I remember the night she stormed out of a family gathering after overhearing our uncle whisper something about contingency paperwork. She'd always been sharper than she let on. I found her number through a mutual contact. Texted once. Just said, need to ask you something. It's about the legacy. She called 20 minutes later. She didn't say hello, just, are you being followed? I told her I didn't think so. She laughed, short, dry. You wouldn't know if you were. Not the way they do it. We agreed to meet. Public place. Broad daylight. 2 cities over. She showed up wearing sunglasses and a wide brim hat like she was playing spy. But when she spoke, her voice shook. I always thought I was crazy, she said. I told myself I imagined it. The paperwork. The storage unit. The men who came in the side door. The clients who didn't cry, just signed and left. I told myself it was just business. Grief makes people weird, that's what they always said. I asked her why she left. She said, because I found the ledger. I knew what she meant before she clarified. The Carrington ledger, not the public one, not the one kept for taxes or state licensing. The real one. It's supposed to be handwritten. Stored in a locked drawer at the original Carrington facility. Red leather cover, gold trim. Every family member knows it exists, but no one talks about it. I'd seen it once, just once, when I was 13, by accident. My grandfather was going over it with my father late one night. I peeked through the cracked office door. I remember pages filled with lines, not names but codes. Symbols, amounts. One page had a full-page sketch of what looked like a map. But with no labels. Evelyn found it, or at least part of it. She said it didn't just contain records. It contained instructions for how to manage Category 4 events, how to avoid triggering audits, how to redirect questions to pre-approved attorneys, which coroner's offices were safe, and most terrifying of all, a list of preferred identifiers, names, identities, people who had been disappeared before and were now available for use. I asked her how many. She said she stopped counting at 83. Then she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You can't end this. You can only walk away." But I told her I already had. That's when she grabbed my wrist. "No," she said, "you published. That's not walking away, that's declaring war." I asked her if she had copies. She shook her head, said she'd burned everything. I don't know if I believe her. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, my bank account was frozen for 48 hours due to suspicious activity. My car was towed without reason from a lot that didn't even have meters. A man in a tan jacket stood outside the grocery store I went to 3 towns over, didn't buy anything, didn't speak, just stood there for 20 minutes before driving off in a rental car with fake plates. And 2 nights ago, I received a package. Plain brown box. No return label. Inside, a single photograph. It was a group shot. Blurry. Old. From a funeral, maybe mid-90s. I recognized the chapel, recognized the pews, but not the faces. Except one. At the far edge of the frame stood a boy. Maybe 10. Suit too big. Hands clasped. Eyes staring right at the camera. It was me. I have no memory of that day. None. No funeral that year. No event that fits. My mother says we were visiting cousins out of state. My father won't return my calls. But I'm looking at proof I was there. And behind me, in the photo, in the shadows of the altar, just barely visible, is a man. Blurred. Tall. Wearing gloves. Holding the red ledger. I stared at the photo for hours. It was old. The kind of old that smells like mildew and regret. The kind that feels heavier than its weight. I scanned it, enlarged it, ran filters through it, but no matter what I did, the same details stayed burned into my mind, me, looking dead on at the camera. The man in the background. And the edge of the red leather binding just peeking from under his arm. It wasn't just a photo. It was a message. I called Evelyn again, told her about the photo. There was silence on the line. Then she said, "I've seen it too." I froze. "You mean one like it?" "No," she said. "The same one. Different angle. I'm in it, instead of you. Same chapel. Same man. Same ledger. Same stare." I didn't even know what to ask first. She beat me to it. "They're keeping track," she said. "Of all of us. Everyone who ever got close. Who ever asked. It's not just about what we remember, it's about what they need us to forget." I asked her how she got hers. She said it showed up the week after she left the business. I took it as a warning, she added. But maybe it was a receipt. That word sat in my chest like a weight. Receipt. As if we were transactions. Assets. People who'd once belonged to the ledger, and who'd now gone off script. I started going through everything again. Old files. Scans. Notes. I was looking for something. I didn't even know what. But patterns were starting to emerge. In the entries. The coded initials. Even the funeral locations. One kept recurring, Chapel Hill. Not the town. The name of a facility. I'd never worked there, never visited, but I'd seen it on internal ledgers, always as a fallback site. It was one of the original Carrington locations, now supposedly decommissioned. My father once said it had been sold to a private buyer in the 2000s. But every time a Category 4 entry came up in a document, it was tagged CH5 or carbon monohydride R. And then I remembered something Morgan had said in passing, long before she disappeared: if you ever see a Carrington file with a Chapel Hill flag, assume the real story's not in the paperwork. I decided to go. The property records were confusing. The deed had changed hands 3 times in 15 years. Always between holding companies. No names, no physical addresses, just P.O. boxes in Delaware and Florida. But the land itself was traceable. Chapel Hill Funeral and Repose Center. Still standing, still registered, still listed, strangely, as non-operational but structurally maintained. When I arrived, it looked abandoned. Paint peeling, iron gates rusted, weeds growing through the gravel. But the front door wasn't locked. Not even latched. It swung open with a sound like a breath being held too long. Inside, the lights didn't work. Dust coated everything, but the furniture was intact. Nothing vandalized, no sign of squatting, as if it hadn't been deserted, just paused. I wandered through the halls like I was walking through a version of my childhood I'd forgotten. Same oak doors, same white lilies in faded vases, same waiting room with the muted green carpet. I remembered none of it, but my body did. I felt it, like muscle memory from a different life. Then I found the elevator. It was tucked behind a supply closet. Not marked on the blueprint I'd printed, but clearly functional, old, metal, industrial, the kind used in morgues and archive basements. The buttons were worn, but one stood out, B3. Basement level 3. I pressed it. The elevator groaned to life. I thought it would stop at B1. Then B2. But it didn't pause. It went straight down, deeper than it should have been allowed to. My ears popped. The hum of machinery grew louder, then stopped. When the doors opened, the air was different. Cold, sterile, tiled floor, fluorescent lighting that flickered every few seconds. And rows of filing cabinets. Endless. No labels, no names, just numeric codes and handwritten symbols on yellowing tape. I picked one drawer at random. Opened it. Inside, forms. Dozens. Hundreds. Each one a certificate of repose, a type of internal Carrington-only document used for bodies in custody prior to official processing. Most mortuaries never use them anymore. We were taught they were discontinued. These weren't. Each file had the same pattern, an initial identifier, an intake timestamp, a method of entry, usually private referral or category 4, and a destination code. Many of them, CHR. Chapel Hill, restricted. The forms didn't list names. But they had personal details. Approximate age, race, cause of death, sometimes just undisclosed. And then I found one that stopped me cold. Date of intake, September 14, 1995. Age, 10. Gender, male. Referrer, C-Gen 3. Comments, needs observation. Prior exposure to sensitive material. Disposition, pending, hold status. There was no conclusion, no cremated, no released, just hold status. And the final line? Associated file. Red Ledger, CHR 14. I looked at the code. CHR 14, the same number scribbled faintly on the back of the photo I'd received. I didn't remember that year. I was 10, but something had happened, something big enough that they created a file, marked it, flagged me, and then rewrote it. I backed away, suddenly aware of how alone I was, how far underground, how little anyone knew of my whereabouts. I felt like I was standing in the heart of the machine that built my family, and realized I was inside something that never intended to let me walk out again. But I did, barely. The elevator groaned the whole way back up. The front door was still open when I reached the surface. But the sky had changed. Dusk now, and a car was parked on the gravel lot. A black sedan, engine running, no driver visible. I didn't wait to check. I drove for hours that night. Back roads, no GPS, just instinct. I made it back to a safe place, a contact of Evelyn's, someone who owed her a favor. I told him nothing, just said I needed a bed and a locked door. That was 5 days ago. Since then, I've received 2 more packages. One with a copy of my original Carrington employee badge, even though I turned it in years ago. The other with a note, typed, that said, "It ends with you, or it continues." There is no middle ground. I don't know what I'll do yet. All I know is, I was never supposed to find that file. Never supposed to remember that year. Never supposed to see myself in that photograph. But now I have. And the most terrifying part? I'm starting to wonder how much of my childhood was mine at all. The phrase kept looping in my head, prior exposure to sensitive material. As if I'd seen something I wasn't meant to. Something at 10 years old. Something so serious they'd created a record, flagged me, and quietly buried the entire thing, until now. I started trying to reconstruct that year from scraps. Old photos, school records, journals. I didn't keep a diary, but my mother used to make me write thank you letters after every birthday. In one of them, dated October 1995, I wrote, "Thank you for the wooden box. I like the secret drawer. I put the shiny thing inside." Like Grandpa said, I didn't remember that box. Or the drawer. Or what the shiny thing was. But the letter was real. My mother had saved it in a bin with other keepsakes. I found it buried under framed school pictures and a faded drawing of our family dog. That night, I called Evelyn again. Told her about the letter. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Do you remember when Grandma fell and broke her hip?" I didn't. I said so. "You shouldn't," she said. "Because it didn't happen." She explained, around that same time, our family had told everyone our grandmother was injured, bedridden, needed rest. But Evelyn had caught a glimpse of her being wheeled out of the Carrington Eastview facility at night, covered in a blanket, accompanied by two men who weren't family. She was crying, Evelyn said. Not from pain, from panic. I asked where she went. She didn't, Evelyn said. They cremated her 3 days later. No autopsy, just a closed service and a new plaque. That was the first time I felt the line blur, between accident and decision. Between memory and design, because what if I hadn't forgotten? What if I'd been made to forget? I dug deeper, went to the library archives. Found old funeral bulletins. The one for my grandmother's injury period had no hospital name. No rehabilitation center listed, just the phrase resting with family support. And then, 3 days later, her obituary. The obituary listed her as having passed peacefully in her sleep. Except her medical file, what little I could pull from public databases, had one strange discrepancy: no death certificate filed under her name in the county registrar. Only a record of cremation, filed by Carrington. You must have seen it. That's when it hit me. The Red Ledger wasn't just a record book. It was a transfer document. A tool for passing power and responsibility from one Carrington to another. And someone had chosen me. At 10 years old, maybe accidentally, maybe because I was in the wrong room at the wrong time. Maybe because my grandmother broke the rules. But once the exposure happened, they couldn't erase me, not completely. So they buried me in their system, hid me under hold status, and waited. But now I wasn't a child. I was awake, a liability, and liabilities don't stay off ledger for long. I started preparing for the worst. Encrypted backups, emergency contacts. I sent a copy of the file referencing carbon monohydrate R14 to a lawyer I'd met during my early investigations. Told him to open it only if I disappeared. Sent another to a journalist, not Aaron Maddox, the first one, but someone newer. Hungrier, the kind who didn't ask if it was dangerous, just asked when they could publish. Then I did something reckless. I went back to Eastview. It had been renovated, according to the Carrington website. The new director was someone I didn't recognize, a man in his 30s with a tight smile and soft hands. He gave me a tour like I was a potential investor. Everything smelled like lavender and false sympathy. But I wasn't there for nostalgia. I was there for the file room. It hadn't changed locations. I knew the codes. Still worked. Inside, everything was digitized now, rows of flat screens and temperature-controlled drawers. But I found one terminal still logged into the internal archive. I searched for carbon monohydrate R14. Access denied. I tried again, using a master code I'd remembered from years before, one my Uncle Robert used when training me. This time, it opened. The file was minimal, no images, no documents, just a string of entries. Subject flagged, E3 exposure. Hold request initiated by FC. Disposition pending approval, red. Scheduled for reprocessing, 2021, delayed. Status, active. Reprocessing? It wasn't a funeral term. It wasn't anything in the Carrington training manuals. Unless it meant something else. Something beyond erasure. Something like reintegration, realignment, control, as in, take the one who remembers and fold them back in. Make them forget again, or make them useful. I left Eastview fast. Too fast. I think someone noticed. I saw a car in the rearview mirror that matched the one from Chapel Hill. Black, tinted, no plates. I didn't go home. I didn't go to Evelyn. I drove until I hit a town I didn't recognize, rented a room with cash, and left my phone in a dumpster behind a diner. Then I wrote this. Because if you're reading it, you need to understand something. This isn't a conspiracy. It's not a theory. It's not paranoia. It's family. It's what happens when legacy becomes more important than law. When tradition is used as a weapon. When the people trusted to honor the dead learn how to bury the truth along with them. I was supposed to carry this on. But I'm not. Because if I don't break the line now, someone else will inherit it. Someone younger. Someone who thinks the red leather book is just a family keepsake. Someone who smiles at the old stories and doesn't realize they're being trained, not raised. If they come for me, fine. But someone out there will still have the files. The names. The truth. And that's how the legacy ends. Not with silence, but with a record they can't erase. I know what some people will say after reading this. That I'm paranoid. That I'm inventing meaning where there's none. That families are complicated, and trauma makes people rewrite the past. That I'm reading too much into documents, too deep into memories, too obsessed with a name, a building, a system. That legacy is just a word, not a weapon. And maybe some of that's true. But it doesn't explain the photos I never took. It doesn't explain the files they tried to hide, and then scrub when I access them. It doesn't explain why people go missing. And why the Carrington family always seems to know how to say the right thing when they do. And it sure as hell doesn't explain the boy in the photograph, me, staring into a camera I don't remember, in a funeral I was never supposed to be part of, holding a look I can't shake even now. Let me be clear about something. This wasn't about a business. It wasn't even about death. It was about control. Control disguised as duty. Silence masked as tradition. Obedience passed down like silverware at a family dinner, polished. Expected, never questioned. And the moment I stopped playing my part, I saw what the legacy really was. A machine. Not a loud one. Not a dramatic one. No, this was the kind that hummed quietly, efficiently, dressed in tailored suits and perfect manners. The kind that doesn't just destroy you, it edits you. Files you. Reclassifies you as a non-event. I was almost that. I was almost erased. They tried to fold me back in. Tried to bring me home, like a stray page from a sealed book. I know that now. I know the looks, the messages, the way the shadows show up just long enough to make you question your own outline. But here's what they never expected. That I'd remember. That I'd dig. That I'd find others. That I'd be willing to let go of everything, the family name, the safety, the inheritance, just to make sure their story wasn't the only one left standing. They still send messages sometimes. Not direct. Never threats. That's not their style. No, Carringtons are more refined than that. They leave subtle signals. A page left open to a ledger code I never mentioned aloud. A fresh flower on my doorstep, the kind only used in Carrington memorials. A phone call with no voice, just a faint sound of water dripping. The same sound I remember from the Chapel Hill sublevel. Once, someone sent me an obituary. My own name. No dates. No photo. Just, he served his legacy quietly. That one almost broke me. Because for a second, just 1 second, I thought maybe I was already dead. Not in the literal sense. But in the way that matters to them. Dead to the family. Dead to the story. Dead to the version of me that followed orders and held secrets and didn't ask why there were always more cremations than coffins. But then I remembered something my grandmother used to say, back when I was a kid and still thought the family business was noble. She'd whisper it when no one else was around, brushing the hair from my eyes like I was porcelain. One day, someone will choose not to carry this anymore. And that will be the beginning of our freedom. I didn't know what she meant back then. Now I do. She wasn't warning me. She was hoping for me. I don't know where this ends. I don't have some grand expose queued up. I'm not some whistleblower hero. I'm just someone who was born into something and finally said, no. And if they find me, and they might, I hope this stays. I hope someone prints it out. Folds it, tucks it into a hollowed-out book or a safety deposit box or the back of a drawer where the red leather ledger used to live. And when someone asks, years from now, what legacy did you choose to end? You show them this. Show them the story of a family that built its name on silence. Of a system that used mourning as a mask. Of a boy who saw something at 10 years old that they tried to make him forget. And of a man who remembered anyway. Because they called it duty. I called it survival. And when they tried to call me back, I didn't answer. I'm not your ledger. I'm not your heir. I'm not the legacy. I'm the ending.